Hey guys, Mark from Modus here. Today we are looking at the QDR. This is an element that comes from capoeira and is a very nice element to start working on some hand balancing that can be tied in nicely with a lot of locomotion and floor movement works. It also becomes a great element to transition out of higher up acrobatics down back into the floor. So learning how to use our elbow as a bit of a lever to shift in and out of the floor makes it a very useful tool to spend some time with. In the beginning, the QDR can be very awkward. I know I certainly didn't like practicing it in the beginning because it felt so weird. So keep in mind that it will get easier. There's many different points that can be a weak link in working on this, and we'll talk about some of them later on in the video. We're going through the steps to help you learn it, and then we'll go into more details that you may or may not need, but are there if you want them. The first thing that we need to address is where the elbow goes on the body. Sometimes you'll see people learning elbow levers, which has the elbow in front. It's not what we're looking for. We want to go into the side of the body. This bone that sticks out on top is the iliac crest. If we follow that forwards, you feel this bone that sticks out in front, and this is called the ASIS. And then a bit lower, we've got this bone that sticks out of the side, and this is the greater trochanter of the femur. So once again, we've got iliac crest, greater trochanter, and ASIS, and we want to put our elbow in between these 3 points. Now for you, depending on your size, build, and shape, you may have to side flex. So you have to find what you can do to get that elbow to the position. Now earlier I mentioned there's a few problems that can get in the way of this. One is external rotation of the shoulder. If you have very limited range of motion and external rotation, then it's going to be hard to balance out to the side. Because my torso should be sideways and the forearm should be more or less in line with the torso. You can make up for this if you have a lot of range of motion in the scapula and or a lot of rotation in the spine. But just because you can make up for it doesn't mean that we ignore the weak link. It's something that you should keep working on. So if you're having problems, start to identify what the issue is. And for most people, it tends to be that external rotation position, and that should be the first range of motion that you work on. So I'm going to show you 2 different ways you can get into this position, and you pick which one you prefer. Turn your hands out on the floor. Bring one knee to the opposite ankle. Bend your elbow. And now we bring that point on the hip that we mentioned before to the elbow. When you do this, you need to lift your hips up high or else you'll start to collapse into the arm a little bit. So you lift your hips up high and bring your hip to your elbow. Depending on your comfort and your range of motion, you may just start holding there. This can be very uncomfortable for some people. So that's perfectly fine. If you can, you start shifting forwards, aiming to get the head to the floor. And at any point of that, if you feel that that is enough range of motion for you and it's pretty challenging, just work on your holds for 15 to 30 seconds in that position. Notice that as I shift my weight forwards, I am shifting my elbow forwards as well. The elbow cannot stay behind the hand or else you'll collapse as soon as you try to lift the legs. Once you get your head to the floor and slide it forwards, walk your knees closer, aiming to get the bottom knee onto the elbow. If you're unable to get the bottom knee onto the elbow, you can start with the top knee, but keep them squeezed together. We are absolutely using the head for some balance, so make sure you keep the neck more or less straight in the beginning so it's not too weird of a position depending on the strength of your neck. If you need some intermediate stages to get to, that's a nice way to work into it. If you're a little bit more comfortable with balancing on your hands and putting your head on the floor, you can skip a few of these steps by placing your elbow on your knee, other elbow in the right location on the hip, and just folding over your arms all at once. The thing to watch out for with this variation, if I don't have the range of motion to get my head to the floor first and then slide forwards to lift the legs, you may have a moment of accidentally hitting your head on the floor too hard, and I don't recommend that. So maybe you need to take another few steps to get into it, even if it feels awkward. For each of the following variations, you should be able to hold the previous one for 30 seconds on each side before you go any further. Once you're able to hold 30 seconds with the knees on the elbow, you're going to aim to lift the legs. Once you can hold this for 30 seconds, you open up your legs. Bottom leg goes forward, top leg reaches back. As I open up my legs, notice my head slides further forwards on the floor for the counterbalance. If I don't slide my head forwards, I will fall out of the position every single time. Once you can balance, head on the floor, feet off the floor, you aim to get your head off the floor too. Same thing, we need to counterbalance. As I lift my head, I slide it forwards a bit more, sending it that direction so I don't immediately fall as my balance changes. Once you can hold with the head off the ground, you start working towards 5 fingers, 4 fingers, 3, 2, 1, working tapping with the fingers, and eventually hands free. Now, a few notes to help with this. If you're finding your legs are wobbling all over the place, we need to create more tension in the legs. Top leg is reaching back. Maybe the knee is bent, that's okay, reaching towards the ground. Maybe it's straight, up to you. Bottom leg is off and also straight. We then need to create tension in the legs by doing a little counter twist. So the top leg reaches down towards the ground, the bottom leg reaches up towards the ceiling. This will create a bit more tension in the legs, make it a bit easier to counterbalance as you lift your head off the floor. So the beginning positions of the QDR are really quite uncomfortable. It's quite awkward, takes a bit of strength, it's very squished up. But as you go through the progressions, it actually feels a bit easier on the body. It's just harder to balance. So because there's no balance in the beginning, variation that feels harder as you start to develop your balance. One thing to be aware of, if you have any wrist issues, this one can be fairly intense. You'll notice that when you shift into the arm, if you don't have that external rotation and you do have wrist issues, it starts to put a lot of pressure as the elbow goes over the fingers. So you might need to take it easy and do an easier version that doesn't hurt your wrist too much. If you start to fall over the wrist, it can be quite challenging, but it just means that your elbow likely isn't in the right position, or maybe you need to be more active, pulling that elbow in and pushing your hand out as you go into the floor. You can also do a bit of a prep drill on the wall to help you understand the position that you're looking for from the shoulder, from the scapula, and from the spine. Place our hand on the wall, fingers facing backwards. When doing this drill, to try to replicate the full position, make sure that your elbow is 90 degrees or greater, but certainly not less than. Now, when you're doing this drill, we want to recreate the position of your center of mass over your balance point. The balance point is the hand, and your center of mass is going to be somewhere around your hips. Your hand should be about hip height. Fingers are faced backwards. You have your elbow in towards your torso. If you lack range of motion, you may need to focus on pushing that elbow forwards. Then lift your hips up and place the hips onto the elbow in that position we mentioned earlier. If we were sideways, my bottom leg is forwards, my top leg is back. And you can practice holding this position and making little adjustments to feel where your limitations are and what it's supposed to feel like. That's all for this one. If you have any questions or need some personalized help, send us a message, comment below with whatever you're looking for, or reach out by email if you have any questions about personalized online support or coaching. Stay on the move.